Welcome back. I have another interesting and it should be a good conversation here, man. My man's name is Clay Travis, and he is the host and the creator, if I'm not mistaken, of Outkick the Show.
Outkick the Show, Outkick the Coverage website. Do radio every morning, 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern on Fox Sports Radio. I'm the lead-in to Dan Patrick and Colin Cowherd, and write, talk, do a little bit of everything.
There it is. Yeah, writer. Man, don't toot your own horn, man. But so how we kind of go back a little bit, actually.
Yeah, I met you when you were, what, a senior at Tennessee?
Senior at Tennessee.
Met your family. I wrote a book. I wrote a couple of books about SEC football.
That's right.
The first one came out in 2007 called Dixieland Delight, about like why Southerners love SEC football so much. I went around as a fan to every SEC school. And then when I wrote the next book, it was about Tennessee.
Right.
And I thought I was writing that book about a season that was going to go really well. Ended up with Phil Fulmer getting fired, and you didn't get drafted.
Yeah.
I mean, everything just kind of went off the rails on that season. Mm-hmm. And so I got to know you a little bit and your family. And
what made you choose Tennessee? Was it like
my grandfather played for General Neyland.
Okay.
Back in the day. So I started going to University of Tennessee games when I was 5 years old.
So for the people that don't know, tell them who General Neyland is.
Yeah, General Neyland is Neyland Stadium, the big football stadium at the University of Tennessee. One of the most successful football coaches of all time. Coached before World War II at Tennessee. My grandfather played in 1933 for General Neyland. Then he took a couple of years off to go serve in World War II, and then he came back and won several championships at Tennessee, one of the most successful coaches of all time. My grandfather was there during the Depression. He said he played football for food, and he was the first in a long line of many University of Tennessee football players who left without graduating. So he had to go to work during the Depression, so he ended up leaving. But he was a big, strong guy, and so I kind of come to it naturally as a Tennessee fan, born and raised in Nashville. And I got into doing what I do now, writing and talking about sports, kind of from the fan perspective.
Because you were a lawyer. You was a lawyer. You went to law school.
I went to law school at Vanderbilt. I practiced law for a couple of years.
What kind of law did you practice?
I was a litigator, but it's interesting. I moved to the U.S. Virgin Islands. So I got married, moved to the U.S. Virgin Islands, and it was interesting. It was a small firm there. It was the biggest in the Caribbean, but that only meant there were 13 lawyers. So I got to do a little bit of everything. So I did some criminal law because there weren't that many lawyers down there. I defended a murderer, drug cases, like several other cool. If you're a normal lawyer, you're not getting involved in criminal if you're doing litigation representing big companies. And I was down there for a couple of years, came back, and while I was practicing law, I started writing online. And I turned that into a way to make a living. I sort of say, people out there listening, I think a lot of people have what they call now a quarter life crisis, where at the age of 25 or so, you find yourself looking around and you're like, man, I don't know if I want to do this for the rest of my life.
Glad you had it early, though.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's kind of when I started to say I don't want to practice law. And the other good thing about being at a small law firm was you got to see exactly what all the higher ups did. And the partners there, and it wasn't something where I thought, man, if I just do this for a decade, I'm going to be able to have an unbelievable job. It's kind of the same thing.
A whole lot of it.
Yeah, a whole lot. And so it's not an awful job, but it was just I wanted to take a shot and try to do something else, and so far that's worked out pretty well.
So this is more fulfilling to you.
I love it.
Yeah,
I don't like getting up at 4 a.m. for my morning radio show.
Yeah, that's
brutal.
Yeah.
But on a day-to-day basis.
So your morning show is, not to cut you off, but your morning show is it from when to when?
6 to 9 a.m. Eastern every day. But I live in Nashville, so it's 5 to 8 a.m. for me every single day.
So
I'm down. We're in Atlanta right now. I'm here for the national title game between Georgia and Alabama.
All right.
And we'll do the show Monday, Tuesday live, I think in front of an audience, although I'm not sure exactly whether it's open to the public and everything else where we'll be. But I've been doing that for a couple of years now.
Right. So in terms of, so you grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, so obviously you were a Tennessee Vol fan, I'm guessing.
100%.
So you're a Vol fan, so that prompted you to try and, or not try, you to write about the... Did you have an inclination that it was going to be one of Fulmer's last years, or was it just you were trying to document?
I thought it would just be a cool experience. I went to Tennessee and they said, yeah, we'll give you basically all access. We'll let you run through the tee. We'll let you sit in the locker room for a lot of these games. So I thought it was going to be a season where Tennessee went 8-4, 9-3, 10-2, like a typical season under Phil Fulmer, because you guys at that time were coming off an SEC championship game appearance where you almost won the SEC outright.
Yeah, we should have won.
And I mean, it was a pretty talented team. I mean, it wasn't like it was
we had a lot of NFL talent.
A lot of NFL talent on that team. So I thought it was going to be, just kind of a look inside an SEC football season, and instead it turned into Phil Fulmer's last year, which was
kind of advantageous to you.
Yeah,
though,
I mean, it ended up being an interesting book, but the challenging thing is, when you're writing a sports book, you don't control the narrative.
Right.
If I sit down, I want to tell the story of Clay Travis or the story of Arian Foster, like I can control and shape it in some way now because your career's over, because I'm in the middle of my career. When you're writing about a football team wins, you write about them winning. Football team loses, you write about them losing. So it was certainly a book I never anticipated writing.
So you kind of have to navigate the waters as it come, not necessarily
100%.
have a...
Yeah.
So what was your perspective? Because was that your first time being involved in any kind of program?
I'd spent time around. I'd never had. It's rare, frankly, for them to let writers just come sit in the locker room at all.
Super rare.
So, I've got guys since then who are players or who are coaches that are fans of what we do at Outkick that have given me access that they wouldn't ordinarily give. But yeah, I hadn't spent any time in a substantial way around. Now, you'll like this. That same offseason or the next year, I decided I wanted to write about training for the NFL Combine. So at D1 Sports, which is a big chain, Will Bartholomew, who went to
Peyton.
who went to UT, and Peyton Manning, several other guys. I spent several months training with those NFL guys like a decade ago.
You trained with them?
Yeah, I mean, train meaning as good as I could. I tried to run the 40. I learned, but I did it literally.
What'd you run it in?
Oh, not good. 5.16 was the best I ever. No, wait, 5. Not good. I'm trying to remember. The first time I ran a 5.6. Because that's one of my favorite things to talk about is...
That's about right.
People think if you can't break a 5, that you're slow. So the average guy who's out there listening to us right now, he's like, oh, if I ran a 40, I'd break a 5. Back when I was in high school and I played football. Like, I think that's the biggest misperception that people have about football players. Yeah. They might understand the strength, but they don't understand the speed. And so if you break a 5.040, you're pretty fast. And most high school football teams don't have that many guys who can break a 5.040.
And then when you look at like 300-pound men who are breaking 5, it's insane.
Just insane. What did you run? That's why you didn't get drafted, right? You had a hurt hamstring?
Well, there was a whole bunch of variables involved that was the reason why. But so I popped my hamstring. I went to the Senior Bowl and I popped my hamstring on a fucking fluke. It was hilarious how I did it, but
in the game itself, or
no, it was in practice. So fuck it, I'll go into it. It was whack. So what was his name? Pat White. You remember him?
The quarterback?
Yeah, the quarterback. So Pat White.
West Virginia or something.
Yeah, West Virginia. So Pat White was the quarterback during the practice, and they make the plays as vanilla as possible.
Yeah.
And so he calls a play, and the play was called fake draw right, screen right.
Yep.
And so we break the huddle. I'm running a fake draw right and screen right.
Nothing to it.
Yeah, nothing to it. So I faked the handoff, but he puts it in my chest, and he thought it was a draw, and so it bounces off my chest. So I'm trying to pick it up, and as I pick it up, a dude comes behind me and pushes me,
and your hamstring,
and it just pops. It was like a grade 2, so it was pretty intense.
How did that felt like just immediately?
You could feel it. It was popping. I was pissed because you're in front of all the scouts. It was bad. It was just bad. So like my world crumbled at that point. But you gotta find a way to rebound. So the combine was probably a month after that, and so I had high hopes of getting healthy
enough to be able to run there. But you never can actually let it go, right? Once you hurt your hamstring, because you're always afraid that you're going to pop it again.
Until you know you're good. And it's all about, it's a confidence thing. You have to just get confident in it. But like 6 weeks out, that was when my pro day was. It was like early March. And I still couldn't sprint. So I had to get a time. So the scouts are like, we got to get a time on you. got to get a time on you. And they pressure you. And so I was like, I'll run. But like, I still wasn't ready. So I think I posted like a 4.7 or something.
Yeah. What do you think you would have run if you'd been like 100% healthy?
So I was a different player in college than I was in the NFL.
Yeah.
Now, if you could look at film and watch that. But if at my top training speed, I was easily a 4.4.
In the NFL guy.
Easily. Yeah. But it's just a different, it's a different game at that level. Especially when things, whatever. I don't want to go back down that road. But so as you, what I want to talk about, man, as you, what was your perspective of the sport and the program or the institution of the NCAA as you get to see the behind-the-scenes action of it?
So my big thing on the NCAA is I think that the concept of improper benefits, that phrase existing, is the most bullshit existence phrase
so you're with me.
in all of sports.
All right.
So, to me, I'm a capitalist, right? I want to make as much money as I can. I want, if you got the talent, if you're a singer, actor, athlete, writer, whatever you do, I want you to be able to sell your labor for as much as you possibly can. So the more time that I have spent around it, the more indefensible it has become to me that you can have a kid go to college and be poor, and the goal of the NCAA is to ensure that 4 years later he leaves and he's still poor. It's literally like a Gestapo that they've got chasing people around to see whether or not you're getting stuff. So, and I think the crazy thing is we got the Georgia-Alabama game going here. I don't know how it's gotten ingrained in people's mind, like that they can't enjoy the game if a guy's got a nice car or if he gets a nice apartment, to play.
It's branding.
Yeah.
It's branding.
But I think most people, if you really sit them down and talk to them, because what's amazing to me is how a lot of the people who will be in that stadium and a lot of people who are college football fans in general are big capitalists, right? Like they are pro markets, like they believe in companies succeeding and people making money. And yet when it comes to college football, they're like, oh, those guys should make no money, or college basketball. So my thing is, like, I've got no issues, and I think the NCAA is, we talk a lot about morality. And I would say for me, I'm always questioning my opinions, right? Some people are like, I believe this and I'll never change my mind. For me, what I can kind of trace it to is I was at the South Carolina-Florida game when Marcus Lattimore went on the road and carried the ball 40 times for 200 yards freshman year.
Right.
He should have had the opportunity to go pro at the end of his freshman year if he wanted to. I think Maurice Clarett should have had the opportunity to go pro at the end of his freshman year if he wanted to. Whether he would have been good enough or not is another question.
I'm not sure about that one, though.
But so I think at 18, my thing is, if we're willing to let guys carry machine guns in Afghanistan and get shot at 18, I'm not the person who sits around and says, oh, if that guy ends up a bust in college and leaving because he left early, that's on him, right? Like you succeed or fail. So Lattimore tore up his knee his sophomore year, tore up his knee again his junior year. No doubt that he's an NFL running back. Easily. He never got to play. So he could have decided to stay and take that risk if he wanted to. But to me, if I were advising my own son, I always take it out of sports, because the average person who's listening doesn't think about it from a sports perspective because they don't know what it's like to be a great athlete. So I try to put it in their own life. If somebody's listening to us right now and they work as a roofer, if I told you and your roofer you're going to sign a $20 million guaranteed contract, or you can continue to work for basically free, you're low income. Oh, yeah. You can sit out for a year, or you can and so I say for radio all the time, if you told me right now, Clay Travis, next year you're going to sign a $20 million contract, but in the meantime you could lose your voice and never be able to speak again, guess what I'm doing? I'm out. I'm not doing radio for a year. It's not working. Yeah, so
no, for sure.
All those questions like Jadeveon Clowney, should he sitting out bowl games?
100%.
I'm 100% with the players.
That's good. The only reason why I'm kind of reluctant to say that like an 18-year-old kid, because then you'll have kids who think that they're ready, and it's a different game. So if they know what they're signing up for, but as far as it should be on them, but I would advise against it, because there's a certain physicality that you're actually gonna endanger yourself if you're not ready.
What I would like to see, honestly, is everybody has the concept that exists in college baseball. I would like to see guys be able to go through the draft, see where they get drafted, be able to negotiate and decide what they want to do, and then if they don't want to go pro, let them go back to. I like
that idea,
and then come back out again. Like I find it hard when guys have market value and they're not able to see what their market value is, and it's a risk of, I'm going to leave college, and then you get drafted in the 5th round, or you don't get drafted at all.
And that kills me. It's like you said, the majority of the sports fan is, I'm for free market, I'm for small government, I'm for this and that, and then they'll turn around and say you can't market yourself because you're amateur.
And I think that's because I think you're right. They've been sold a bill of goods. I think most people don't question their beliefs, and that's my number one thing all the time. Right? Like every single year, I'll go back and I'll look and I'll be like, do I still believe X, Y, or Z? Usually my answer is yes. Like I'm, pro-choice. I'm anti-death penalty. Like I'll run over all that stuff just based on my life experience. But you know what? My life experience could change, and or there could be new data that makes me re-examine the thought that I already had. So
that's the logical perspective to go.
Yeah, that's what I try to do.
I try to do that as well.
And most people don't. Most people make a decision, and then they'll defend that decision to the end to come hell or high water, no matter what. I try to be open-minded at least to say, why do I believe this? Should I reconsider it? And, when I was in high school or college, I think I would have been like, oh, you can't pay players, even up through, remember the Cam Newton controversy. Right. And now after the Lattimore situation in the last decade, my opinion on that's changed a lot.
Wow, what are you, 30?
38.
38? It takes a lot for a 38-year-old man to change his mind.
I've changed my mind on a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, like, I mean, and the other thing is, for better or worse, like, people ask me a question, I'll tell them exactly what I think. And usually, if I don't know, I'll just say I don't know. That's also rare, right? Like, one of the things that I learned practicing law is trying to give people an idea of every single legal question they could ever have. One of the first things you learn when you graduate from law school is, for the rest of your life, your family's going to be coming to you and they're going to be like, hey, I'm getting a divorce. What do you think I should do about it? Or I got this child custody dispute. And I'm like, man, that's not my expertise. Or, you know, I got this dispute about, you know, tax law. And I'm like, man, I'm not a tax lawyer, right? I mean, I can tell you some stuff, but knowing what you don't know as you get older, I think is one of the most valuable skills that you can acknowledge. You don't have to have an opinion on everything.
Yeah, it's humility. So, I mean, it's kind of a running theme in my podcast. Are you a religious man?
So it's a good question. So I was raised really religious in Southern Baptist Church, grew up in Tennessee.
Right.
And I remember being 5 and 6 years old. And so, like, we had some missionaries come up from Brazil to stay, like, in people's homes and stuff like that.
Right.
And for people who don't know, Southern Baptist, First Baptist, Baptists in general, in order to go to heaven, you have to be fully immersed. Right? Like, you have to go, and people out there are like, what does that mean? You have to go underwater while taking Jesus as your savior, right?
Right.
And I remember being 5, 6 years old and going to church every, you know, Wednesday and Sunday and everything else. And when those Brazilians came up, it was like, might as well have been Mars, right? When you're a kid in Tennessee, you don't know the world at all. And they were Catholic. And the preacher did an entire sermon on the fact that unless we fully immersed these Brazilians, they were going to go to hell. Because if Catholics are sprinkled, right?
Jesus.
And I remember thinking to myself, can you imagine a God being so insecure that if somebody didn't go under the water to acknowledge his superiority, but got sprinkled with water instead, that would be like, you know, like...
It makes sense.
Right? But I mean, as a kid, I remember thinking that. So I'm not a dogmatic guy. Right. You know, like I always think that people who believe they know 100% the truth one way or the other scare me a little bit. Like, I tend to be a middle of the road kind of guy. Like, you know, I'm going to look at the whole perspective. So I would say that I'm, you know, like, I believe in a God, but what I would like to have in an afterlife. If you said, Clay Travis, what's an ideal afterlife to you? Right. It would be that everything just doesn't cease one day. What I fear is not knowing what happens in the millenniums to come.
I've always wondered that, though. Like, why do people fear that? Because I'll tell you, from my perspective, this is how I look at it. Like, I don't look at it as something to be scared of, for the simple fact that prior to 1986, I have no fucking clue about anything. I have no recollection.
But you can read about it. And you can still say, I'm a history guy. Like, I love reading about...
So you're afraid of what you're going to miss out on?
Yes. I love reading about, like, ancient Rome. Or I love reading about the pyramids.
Right.
Or I love reading about, you know, American history and everything that was long before me, the stories. And so, yeah, I genuinely am afraid. I'm like, man, I'd like to know what 100 years from now will be like. So I wish I could save my brain. And, like, they could just plug me in, like, Matrix style, and I could just see, like, things that are going to happen in years ahead. I don't necessarily need to be active in it.
Right.
I would just like to see those stories. You know, I just like to know what's going to happen.
I honestly think that's next, though, right? So, like, when
I would
you look
love
at,
to have that. Like, that would be ideal.
When you look at the evolution of our society and where it's going, I don't see it so far fetched, like, in 200 years that we're
that our brains
interwoven with computers, and we figure out what consciousness is.
Yeah, and so the other thing is, like, I've got 3 boys. I know you got 4 kids yourself. I would like, especially if I've always been afraid I'm going to die young for whatever reason.
I
think you have that fear.
I don't have a fear, but I just feel like I'm going to die young.
Yeah, and so I've always felt like that, and I think especially once you become a dad, like, you sit around and that, like, I don't really worry about my life at all, right?
Yeah,
like, I feel like I've had a good life. I'm 38. If something happened to me, but I want to be there for my boys into adulthood, right? And so, and beyond that, I'd like to know what they're going to do, what their lives would be like. So the big loss to me would not be me not being able to do things, because I feel like I've had a great life and gotten to do pretty much everything that I want to do to this point. It would be not being able to see what's going to happen with them and be there in some way to help them,
for them,
right?
For them.
And so I like the idea of being able to, you know, let's say I'm 38 and I'm going to live to be 80 or whatever, you know. I like the idea of being able to plug back in at 25 years after I die and just get downloaded everything that's happened, you know, like see all those stories.
But then again, like, I think that's part of the beauty of life is its unknowns.
Yeah.
Like,
would you want to know when you're going to die?
No.
See, and my answer is yes if it's going to be soon, no if it's going to be a long time. Like, if
why would you want to know if you're going to be?
Because I would want to get my boys and my wife and my family prepared for that. As like, if you told me right now you're going to die in 6 months,
right.
I would want to know that, right? If you told me you're going to die in, 46 years, I wouldn't want to, like, you're going to live a long life, I would be fine with it. But if I were going to die soon, I would just want to be able to prepare my family for that eventuality. Not that I haven't done it a little bit already,
right.
but just to, like, I'd probably write a book for my kids, right? Like, right. I'd want them to feel like I was still around even when I wasn't.
I don't want to fuck his name up because I bawled during the movie. The Saints player that had ALS.
Yes.
What is his name? Jesus, I'm gonna type it in while I'm talking. But
there's the guy right now who had Tim Shaw has it for the Titans.
Does he really?
Yeah.
Oh my
former
God.
Special team linebacker.
That's another one of not my fears, but it's like a
You lose control of your body.
Shit sits in the back of my head like one day something. Steve Gleason, that's his name, Steve Gleason. But it sits in the back of my head that someday something's gonna happen where I can't push through because I'm such like as an athlete, you try to will your way through so much. Like I don't take a lot. I don't take any antibiotics. I will when I feel like I need it. But
right.
like colds, flus, I feel like I can push through all of that.
Yeah, I don't take it. My wife gets mad at me because I don't take stuff for that either.
Man's man, I like
it.
But and I do it more because the more antibiotics you take, the less likely they'll be effective when you really need them.
I agree. I also feel like your body naturally heals itself most of the time.
It will.
And so I don't want like all those chemicals in my body if I don't need them. So I think it gets over quicker.
Yeah, we definitely prescribe antibiotics way too much in this country. And if you let it run its course, for the most part, unless you're like in dire need and something of an ailment, I think you'll be fine. And when you really need them, they'll help you out. But so that Steve Gleason movie, I was watching that and I just remember bawling, and I just remember being so inspired by it because just like you said, you would want to kind of leave a book for him, and that's what he did. As soon as he found out he had it, he started documenting it and the video of it. And then you see the pain and the strife that he goes through with his family. But I would agree with that. Like you would want to leave them something, but I still don't think I would want to know, even if that was the case.
Yeah, I think about that all the time. For instance, now with like self-driving cars, because I like to think about what our kids or our grandkids will think is crazy that we dealt with, because people tend to think, oh, everything that exists in your life now is normal.
Yeah.
But I think like our grandkids will find the idea that somebody could get into a car to drive to go grocery shopping and die to be like unbelievable, right?
Yeah,
I mean, like, what are you talking about? Grandma went to get milk and died. Like that'll be as insane to us as like as sane to them as somebody like breaking a leg and dying was, like 100 years ago.
Yeah, even like if you look at like Gale Sayers, I think what ended his career was like an ACL tear or something like that.
Right, which would just be like nothing.
Yeah, off season.
Or even like Bo Jackson might have been like, imagine Bo Jackson with modern medicine when he got injured.
Yeah.
Maybe they could have brought him back too.
Easily. So I want to get into this, man. It's interesting. Like I have like a mixed bag perspective of your worldview, right? Because like you said, you're fairly liberal when it comes to some things, but then again, I think you're fairly conservative when it comes.
Yeah,
to
I'm a middle
things.
of what I call myself as a radical moderate. I think we live in an era.
Explain that term.
Yeah, so I think we live in an era where people are far right and they're far left, and we hear them talking like 95% of the time. And I think the vast majority of Americans of all races, religions, ethnicities, and everything else actually dwell somewhere in the middle when you actually break down all their opinions, right? You might have some opinions that are somewhat conservative, some that are somewhat liberal. And so I'm frustrated because I feel like both sides are yelling at each other all the time, and there's lots of people who I would consider myself to be like in the middle that feel like we're getting totally ignored even though we're the majority. Right.
Okay, so and this is part of the reason that I think it's been an intriguing conversation, because I think that I would consider myself like left middle.
Yeah.
If there is such a thing. I'm not super far left and I'm definitely not super far right, but I definitely hold some ideas. Like you said, you're pro-life. I'm not.
No, pro-choice.
I'm sorry, I'm pro-choice. I'm not pro-choice.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I sit on the fence and I wipe my hands. I would never say, what you should do with your body.
Yeah.
So I guess in essence that makes me pro-choice. But I totally understand the argument because we don't know when life starts. Like we don't know.
And look, I'll be honest with you. Once I had kids of my own, it was more challenging to be pro-choice completely.
Right.
Right. To go through a pregnancy process, to see the birth, see the heartbeat, everything else. Right. But I'm a dude, and I don't think it's appropriate for men to tell women that they have to hold, that they have to take kids to birth. Right. But I definitely think when you go through the birth process and kind of see how amazing it is, that you take a step back and you're like, ooh, this is, like dirtier than I thought it was before I got involved, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. And that's why like I'm super on the fence on it, because I understand both sides. I've seen, and a lot of it is anecdotal, and that's the thing about social issues. It's mostly anecdotal. Yes. There's data, but data tells half the story in my opinion. I'm
a facts over feelings guy would be another way that I put it. Like in social media and social era, so many people respond emotionally to everything, right? And that can be fine, but responding emotionally to things can lead you astray if you think that emotional response is indicative of larger societal issues. And that's where I kind of sit back and say, okay, this individual case, that sucks, but I want to see the data to see whether it's truly a national issue, or is this a kind of an aberrant, strange.
Right. And I think it depends on what we're specifically talking about in that analogy. But I think that when you're dealing with data sets in social issues, so if it's different than hard science and social science are two different things. So if I tell you that there's a light spectrum and I can show you the differences in between the colors, there's something demonstrably objective about that.
Yes.
When you're dealing with social science, I don't think that it's as prevalent. I don't think that the truth is as prevalent.
It's harder. It's harder to find. And I think also that's where I say I want to continue to look at the data. The problem I think we get in now is people decide, I believe X, and then there's plenty of individual anecdotal data to support X or Y, right?
I would agree with that.
And so I think a lot of times we end up with that's where you have people screaming back and forth. And I'll give you an example. Like, remember when the police shooting happened in Dallas? You're down in Texas. You probably remember that, right? Mm-hmm. Like, immediately people were like rooting for who the shooter was going to be, or even out in Las Vegas. Like the guy who starts shooting. Right. I think a lot of people on social media want that shooter to be motivated in a way that makes their worldview right.
100%.
So people are not even like already beyond the shooting itself. It's like, oh, was he a right-wing Trump supporter who went crazy? This is what we have to look forward to. Was he a left-winger that, has lost his mind? Oh, this is what I'm telling you. The left wing's lost his mind, the right wing.
Right.
And I think that's where it gets a little bit scary because people want individual stories to fit their worldview, and they almost don't care about the individual circumstances. So
that's why it was interesting that you said that, because I feel like you would fall under the category of what I would call a provocateur.
I think that's fair.
So
well, and I also would say this. I'm a provocateur in the sense that I tell people exactly what I think. And I think there's an element of fearlessness
it's deeper than that. I think it's deeper than that.
It might be. I mean, I'm curious. Like,
so I think you might tell people what you think, but I also think you like to poke and prod for. I wouldn't call it attention. I would call it reaction.
Yeah.
So you like the reaction, and you like the wave of I don't want to say confrontation, but the wave of dialogue. Maybe that's a little softer, but the wave of dialogue that comes with the provocation of
some people run from controversy. I love being in the middle of controversy.
Yeah,
and I like the battle of ideas. I like somebody says like don't get in the pig, don't get in the mud with a pig. I like being in the mud.
Right.
I like the day to day.
And I would say that mentality would be productive if it wasn't for some of the languages you use, right? And I'm not talking about cussing. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about so things like, all right, if you could say you could feel what you feel, but when you say things like DeMarcus Cousins is going to get arrested in 5 years or something like that, like, what you're doing.
Well, no, I would say that, first of all, that tweet that somebody went back and found after 5 years was in the middle of a college basketball game when he was getting double technical fouls. Mm-hmm. So I think DeMarcus Cousins has always been like not a very controlled player on the court, right? So I would say that about a white guy, a black guy,
no,
an Asian
not,
guy, Hispanic. Right.
It very may not have.
The immediate response is, oh, that's a white guy who said that about a black guy.
But you have to understand where that comes from.
Yeah, but I think it comes from my belief that, could be wrong, that DeMarcus Cousins' lack of control on the court is also going to lead to lack of control in his life. That's the analogy that I was drawing in that game.
So do you believe that's a prudent thing to say? Like, do you believe, like, if you were sitting face to face with a man and like that's something you would let him know?
I would say, well, first of all, I don't know him. So
no, I know that.
If I were sitting face to face with him, I would have a better sense for what he's like off the court. Like,
right.
Again, that was like something that I tweeted. It's now been like 8 years ago during a basketball.
And I'm not holding you to time. I'm just saying that because there's a whole bunch of
so I don't think like something that I tweeted 8 years ago during the middle of a basketball game. I think if I were, first of all, I also donated $5,000 to his charity. Acknowledged that I was wrong. As soon as that was out, I didn't even remember tweeting that. 5 years ago. It's now been like 8 years ago. But if I'm wrong, and I always say this on my radio show, if I'm wrong about something, I own it. Right. And I told him, I tweeted, I said, I'm wrong. Let me know where I can donate things to your charity there.
Right, and I feel like that was admirable. But this is where I see the problem, and I feel like you're a contributor to the heightened political climate in today's society. So if I feel like to a certain extent, and not all the way, I understand people are crazy as shit, but I feel like to a certain extent you have to be responsible for your fan base, right? And I'm not saying you don't have to.
You think my fan base is not like a good group of people?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm pretty sure that there are. Definitely.
No. I mean, it's an interesting question because I think about that all the time. To what extent and my answer is you shouldn't be responsible, right? Like, because I can't control, like, our fan base, to people who don't know, the Outkick fan base, they're from radio, Periscope, Facebook, podcasts, like writing, all that stuff. We're in the millions of people who consume our content every week. Now, some of those people consume the content because they hate me, right? Like, I'm a guy, for better or worse, people are like, oh, I love Clay Travis or I hate Clay Travis. Right. And there's not a lot of people who are in the middle that are like, I don't really care one way or the other about him, right? And that's fine with me. Like, I don't really concern myself too much with anybody's personal opinion of me unless they actually know me. Right. And then, if it's people I work with and they're like, oh my God, that guy's insufferable, I can't stand to work with him, like, that would bother me. Certainly if my family was like, oh, it's, tough at Thanksgiving to sit around and hang out with, like that, those people know me. Yeah. But in terms of the public arena, it's like you have a brand or you have a public perception. It's like being a politician almost, right? Like, some people like you, some people don't. And
that's how I know it's intentional. So you stir the pot intentionally for the reaction.
Well, I know, like, I always have said, like, I'm in the business of being in the reaction business, right? If I have 10 opinions and 3 of them are completely not interesting, like we just watched the playoff game between Blake Bortles and Tyrod Taylor. Right. I got a radio show tomorrow. If I start off the radio show by saying, I thought Blake Bortles and Tyrod Taylor were both very bad quarterbacks, everybody's gonna be like, "That, you know what? Clay Travis is right." I mean, that's an opinion that 100% of people agree with. So, what I'm in the business of is talking about things that people care about, and people care about things that typically. That's why I use like Twitter polls, for instance. People care about things where 50% of people can think A. And 50% of people can think B. If you've got an opinion that 95% of people agree with, it's probably not an opinion that's very interesting. Just my personal opinion. Right. If you got an opinion that 95% of people agree with, that might be an interesting opinion because you might be right. You might be thinking about it in a way that other people aren't. But on a day-to-day basis, what I try to do is have no filter. And so come on the radio, come on Twitter, write everywhere, 100% exactly what I agree. What I believe, I think that's rare. I don't tiptoe up to an opinion.
And see, I don't think that you believe a lot of stuff that you say.
So, but people say that all the time. But I've yet to hear. And then my next question is like, what do you think that I? So, don't
like
believe?
and this is just like the little research because I'm not. I wasn't super like digging in.
No. I'm curious because people say that. Like, I get accused. Right. Like, it's something people be like, oh, you can't possibly believe that.
Like when you say. Lena Dunham is a bitch.
I think she's a bitch.
Like why would you say like
because I think Lena Dunham is a total bitch. It's funny. Like this is an interesting question. So I had a meeting, and this is always like. So I own Outkick. For people out there who don't know, like I own my own business. I make my own living. I'm not employed right now by Fox or ESPN or anybody else. And one reason that people would say that is we actually had a meeting about that. And the Fox execs set me down and they said, you can't say Lena Dunham is a bitch. And I said, I think Lena Dunham's a bitch. And they said, you can have that opinion, but you can't say it. And I said, why not? Like, and they were like, well, you work at a big company. You just can't say that. And I said, the reason why people like me is because I say exactly what I think. I think Lena Dunham is a bitch. Like, I think she would be an unlikable person.
What is a bitch?
To me, a bitch is somebody. That's an interesting question. To me, a bitch is an unlikable person.
So anybody could be a bitch,
guy or girl. I don't see it as being like I mean, you might say Clay Travis is a bitch, and that wouldn't bother me. You could say LeBron James plays basketball like a bitch.
Definitely does not do that.
But you could say that,
right? And
that wouldn't, like, to me, wouldn't be an insult, right?
So this is where it's funny. So if you, this is why, like, I've heard you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, you kind of don't understand, or maybe you do, and I'll let you say yes or no. So I'm gonna put words in your mouth. From my understanding, you kind of don't understand why you kind of get tagged with the alt-right.
Oh, I think that is yes, I do get tagged that. And I think it's lazy because I don't think people actually look at my political leanings. First of all, for people out there, I worked in Democratic politics.
Right.
I worked on Al Gore's 2000 presidential campaign. When I was in college, I went to George Washington University in D.C. I worked in a Democratic congressman's office. I've donated money to John Kerry, Barack Obama, John Edwards, and to me, like, I've never voted for a Republican for president. In the most recent presidential election, I voted for Gary Johnson, the Libertarian, even though he didn't run a very good campaign.
From New Mexico, ain't he?
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't a fan of Hillary or Trump, and so I think if you look, like I just said earlier, I'm pro-choice, I'm anti-death penalty, I'm fine with, like, I think immigration. I'm not a build the wall kind of guy. Like, any political issue you can ask me a question on. So I just think it's lazy because I'm not out there saying, like, Donald Trump is the worst human being on earth, which a lot of other sports writers and media people are. I think being middle of the road on a lot of issues, or even left leaning on many social issues. Now, I'm fiscally, like, I want low tax rates. I want people to get paid as much as they want. Like, I'm a markets guy there. So I would say I'm fiscally conservative and socially liberal. Gay marriage, I don't care about. So I think you look at all those issues, right, and, like, where is the alt-right stuff? Right.
So you're
like, I think I'm totally middle of the road.
So you're confused as to why that.
I think I think they want me to be alt-right because I think it makes it a sexier story for them.
I'll tell you what, in my perspective, why you get labeled that.
Yeah.
It's because when you say things like Lena Dunham's a bitch, DeMarcus Cousins is going to get arrested. So this is I think this is a big issue in America, period, today, right?
Yeah.
And this is the issue. And I'm not PC at all. That's not what I'm talking about. I think that the issue in America is that there are sexist and racial undertones in what people say, think, and feel, right? So you might call Lena Dunham a bitch, and to you, it doesn't mean that she's a bitch in any kind of sexist way, right?
Yeah.
It just means I don't think
in fact,
you're a
I don't even
person.
see the term bitch as being only used for women. Like,
right.
I would use it as often for men as I would for women.
I understand that 100%. But when you say DeMarcus Cousins, and I'll wrap it up, but, like, when you say DeMarcus Cousins is going to get arrested in 5 years, so the racial undertones of that resonates with your fan base because a lot of them are. Because
maybe that could be true, but the thing is, I treat everybody the exact same. So I think
but that's why I say you're responsible for your fan base, because if you are aware that it's just like the whole Trump David Duke thing, right?
Yeah.
He refused to denounce him until he got held to the fire, right? So you know who your audience is.
But I don't think my audience, I think if you poll them, is college grads, it's grads of grad school.
Right.
Like, I don't buy into the fact that my audience is, I think my audience is basically where I am, middle of the road.
You don't think they're right-leaning?
I honestly don't. I would be, I mean, maybe they're right-leaning because I am in the South and my base has a lot of, Southerners in it.
Of course.
But I don't think, like, if you polled, for instance, I think it gets into the audience. If you polled my radio audience, we're on in all 50 states. I'm on satellite radio, the podcast. I don't know would be the one answer.
Right.
But most of the response that I get is people who are pretty middle of the road. And so what I do, which I think is rare, is I try in media, I think so many people are afraid of being called racist or sexist these days, especially if you're a white guy, that they tiptoe up to opinions. And I don't tiptoe up to any opinion. I don't think that I treat anybody any differently based on their race, their gender, their religion, their ethnicity, any background at all, except I'll give one exception. Good-looking women I treat better than everybody else.
I feel you on that.
And I'll readily acknowledge it. Like my good-looking women, I would call it hot chick privilege. I will give better treatment to good-looking women. And it's the only way that I constantly like look at the way I'm treating people, and I say, would I say this if the guy were white? Would I say this if the guy were black? Would I say this if a guy or girl? I don't treat anybody differently. I think most everybody who I've worked with to be like, yeah, Clay Travis basically talks the exact same way to everybody. So I think it's unfortunate. And look, I mean, I've always said this. I think it's unfortunate if anybody is, to me, what's lazy about judging somebody based on their race or their religion or their gender or their ethnicity or their sexuality or anything else like that is it's just lazy because you don't know whether or not. It's like The Blind Side, right? The movie Blind Side, but the book's incredible. And the purpose of, to me, Michael Lewis writing maybe one of the best sports books ever been written is The Blind Side is about Michael Orr, who protects the blind side of, but on a larger metaphor, it's about the blind sides of our life and the people who have talents that we wouldn't otherwise recognize those talents, right? And so to me, as a guy who believes in markets and talent and everything else, it's incredibly lazy to assume anything about someone until you actually know them. So on an individual basis, I try to judge people based on what I see.
I would agree with that. It is lazy, but so there's a lot of dog whistles that go on in because today is not 1990. Today is not 1980. Like today is a different time and it's a different era.
Yeah.
And in order for progress to happen, I feel like we all have to be aware of our either biases or whatever the case may be. And if your audience is so like this is what kills me about Trump, right? So he knows what his audience is. I don't think he's came out and said it. Not a matter of fact, he probably hasn't. But I think he knows who his audience is, and his audience, in my opinion, is the we want our country back folks. And I'm not saying all, because of course there's definitely a spectrum. There's definitely a bell curve. But I think the majority of his audience is that, right? So
I disagree about that. I think that's the part of his audience that gets a ton of attention. But I think I'm correct in this on the data. Like there were 8 million people who voted for Barack Obama in 2012 that flipped to vote for Donald Trump in 2016. Nobody talks about those people. And that allowed Donald Trump to win Michigan. It allowed him to win Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Wisconsin, right? All those states that people said he had no chance to win. I don't think that they were responding to the negative. I think racist people have voted for Republicans. I mean, Ronald Reagan started his presidential campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi, which is where they buried the Jewish and the black guys in the civil rights movement, right? So racist people have been voting for Republicans, I think, for a long time. Now, I also think, this is an interesting question, like one of the arguments that I make is that we are artificially defining racism in this country today as almost exclusively white to black. In other words, the only racism most of the time that the media focuses on is white people who are racist against black people.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's because historically that is the racism that the country has faced. And I think a lot of people are still fighting the battles of the 1960s. But I think it's overlooking.
So hold on, back up. You said you still think people are fighting the battles of the 1960s. What do you mean by that?
I think a lot of media is fighting the battles of the 1960s, right? The civil rights movement. So I'm a history guy. So I am fascinated by the civil rights movement, by the Civil War, like all of American history, basically, right? And so when I look at the country today, I think, and this is maybe a crazy idea, but I don't hear anybody else ever say it. I think there are as many people who are racist and Hispanic and racist and black and racist and white and racist and Asian in this country as a percentage of the overall population, right? I don't think that racism is a white to black problem. I think there are black people who are racist that also went out and voted for Barack Obama entirely because of the color of his skin and then didn't go vote for Hillary Clinton because they didn't want to vote for a white woman, right? And I think if you are basing your election decision on a white guy voting for Donald Trump because he's white, or a black guy or woman or whoever else voting for Barack Obama because he's black, that's a big issue, right? And I think a lot of what Donald Trump speaks to is people who've been left behind, people who are living in these Rust Belt towns that don't have good jobs anymore, and they feel like the country is not working for them. And that's why you talked about spectrum earlier. To me, like politically, I'm fascinated by it. Everybody talks about right and left, right? Mm-hmm. I think the spectrum's a circle. And I think that people on the far left and people on the far right are actually very similar. They're just frequently different color skin, and they're motivated by fear. If you're on the far left, you're afraid that there's racists out there, that people are trying to do things to you, that if you're a woman, that people are going to be raping you, and all those things. And if you're on the far right, you're like, oh, all these immigrants are coming in and they're taking our jobs, and it's affirmative action is unfair, and I'm getting judged based on the color of my skin now. And so I think there's a lot of fear in the country right now. And I think politicians on the left and the right have gotten very good at motivating people based on fear. And when you actually look at the data, and I've written about this and talked about it, like fear of terrorism, okay? You and me probably don't ever have to worry about terrorism, right? It might happen, but the odds of us being a victim, or anybody who's listening to us right now being a victim of terrorism, are much less than the odds of us getting hit by a train, right? Like, and nobody out there is afraid of that. And I think similarly, the odds of somebody being a victim of a racist, like the KKK doing something to someone, are almost zero, right? But fear.
You're talking about acts of violence.
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's almost never happens, right?
But do you think that there's racism that have different faces? Because this is the argument I hear this argument a lot, that we live in a post-racist society.
I don't think that's true. I think we live in a society where there are racists, but I think the racism is more than just white to black. And I think that there are.
I would me and some of my close people kind of have this argument too, that they feel racism has evolved into something that is more of a power mechanism than it is.
I think it's more classist than it's color based.
I think economics and race are cousins. I 100% think that.
I mean, I think there are a lot. We're in Atlanta. There are a lot of really wealthy black people.
This is Chocolate City, though.
Yeah, but I think there are a lot of really wealthy black people that will look down on other black people who they think are making bad decisions in their life, just like there are a lot of white people who are successful that'll say, oh, those poor white trash. They're making bad decisions. They go live and,
I would agree.
And so it's a caste-based a lot of times, even internally within a race. And then I think it's fascinating. We never talk about, for instance, Hispanic population. Hispanic population is bigger than the black population in America right now. I think that there is a lot of different racial groups inside of the large Hispanic community, right, that look down on each other, that judge each other differently. I think in the Asian community, there's a lot of different judgments going on, a variety of angles. And so I think that race is much more complicated than the way we talk about it in modern society.
I think it is too. And that's why any blanket statement isn't accurate.
And that's why, by the way, most white guys, and certainly in my industry, just say racism is bad. And then it's such a surface level thing to say, but they know that the only way they lose their job is if they say something inappropriate almost exclusively in a racial context.
And
right?
see, I look at it like this, man. In today's society, because we live in the micro, right? We live in the here and the now, and all we know is this. And I'm talking to Clay Travis. But if you look at it macroscopically, like this is the blowback from years and years of dehumanization, years and years of systemic oppression. Would you not agree with that?
Well, it's a good question. Let me put my lawyer hat on here. All right. I think about it in this context. I think we have moved from an era, and again, I'm a history guy, so I'd encourage people to, there are a lot of books that I would say would be incredibly valuable to read, but one of them is a trilogy, Parting the Waters trilogy by Taylor Branch, all about the American Civil Rights Movement. I finished a book a couple of years ago about Thurgood Marshall trying a case, and I wish I could remember the name of it now, in North Florida, which is like the most racist place in America back in the day. And as I was reading that book, I was struck by the comparison between that case that Thurgood Marshall was litigating, where this white woman made up a rape case against these black guys. There's no evidence that it happened, right? It's 1950s era South, Jim Crow. And I was comparing it because I was reading it around the same time as Jameis Winston at FSU.
Okay.
And Jameis Winston was accused of raping a white woman. And everything in that system basically worked to try to avoid an actual investigation taking place because he happened to be a good quarterback, right? And what I think has happened in many ways is we have swung from, if you're white, the law is biased in your favor, and you're more likely to get justice in a court, in the police, and everything else, to in the media, we have swung right past fair and impartial to believing, like I've talked a lot about this case this fall, Michael Bennett. I think if you go look at the evidence, Michael Bennett made up the fact that he was profiled based on his race.
Yeah, I never really looked into it.
So, honestly. I mean, look, does racism exist? Yes, but I think you look at all those cases, I think that, for instance, was made up. But I think the media believed him because he's a black guy because they believe that racism exists, right? I think
policing.
Yes.
That's an important fact.
And also the situation with Ezekiel Elliott. I read all the documents about that. I don't think Ezekiel Elliott deserved to get suspended for 6 games. I think in that case, people believed that woman because they believe that domestic violence is an issue. So when I was in law school, I had a great criminal law professor, and he said the 3 most important things that matter in every case are the facts, the facts, the facts. And so what I do is I go and look at the facts. So you asked a good question. Like, I think what has happened is people want their worldview to be so justified that they believe whatever makes their worldview seem more likely, as opposed to looking at the individual facts of a case. And so I think we've the goal is like fair and impartial justice. I said earlier, I'm not a believer in the death penalty. Why am I not a believer in the death penalty? Because first of all, we're not flawless as lawyers, and we're not flawless as jurors and judges. Like, the legal system has lots of flaws. And so the reason I don't believe in the death penalty is it is a statistical fact that the poorer you are, the worse lawyer you get, and the more likely you are to get the death penalty. And so,
well, that's what kills me. Okay, so if you know that's the case,
yeah,
and you know the majority of poor people getting tried are people of color,
yeah,
and also, I think the CDC came out and said white people and black people use drugs at the same rates. But
I am all this is true. Like, I am a legalized drugs guy.
Right.
I am a.
But this is what I'm saying. So like when you say, yeah, racism exists, but not necessarily institutionally, it's so much more covert, in my opinion, nowadays than it was. There's no Jim Crow laws, but there are laws. There definitely our criminal justice system. You would agree it needs reform.
A billion percent. And look, I am a legalize it and tax it guy. I think you would get me going. Like, I think the idea that we have tax-paying dollars going to pay women to be fake prostitutes.
Yeah.
Like, if you and I go out and get a beer and we sit at a nice hotel in Atlanta, there's a decent chance that girl's not a hooker. That's somebody that our tax dollars are paying, and she's trying to get us to.
Appreciate the tip, though.
Yeah. No. But I mean, I've seen these cases so often. I'm like, can you believe that our tax dollars are going to pay a woman to pretend to be a prostitute? Like, I'm a markets guy. I said that earlier.
Right.
Same thing with drugs. The reason why there's a market for drugs here. Now, I'm not talking about drugs that can kill you if you use them. I think it's important to, if there's
water could kill you if you use enough.
Well, yeah, but if the first time you use heroin, thankfully I haven't tried it, but you can get addicted to it.
Right.
Then I think there are some drugs, but like, if people want to use cocaine, or if people want to smoke weed or all that stuff, like, I'm totally fine with it. So no, I acknowledge that there are many flaws. And I even approach this from I hate to spend our tax dollars on it. I hate that instead of taxing and legalizing it, that you and I, and everybody out there who's listening to it, that they're taking our money and giving it to police officers to go arrest dudes who are selling weed.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Think that's crazy.
So, I mean, to kind of tie it back to what we were talking about, overwhelmingly, people of color are arrested for narcotics.
Yeah.
Than anybody else. So there are, I think when people talk about racism in today's society, there's nobody hanging anybody from trees. I mean, there still are those cases, but they're rare. But there's definitely data that supports a undercurrent of people of color still getting the shaft in the legal system, in policing.
But I think a lot of that has to do with money, more so than it's structural racism. I think that if, O.J. Simpson got off for double murder,
okay,
because he had the money to have the best.
You're looking
lawyers.
at an anomaly, though.
No, but I'm saying, like, the most important color in America today is green, because if you have enough money, Michael Jackson got away with God knows what. Like, if you have enough money, Adrian Peterson, got charged with child abuse, got off with basically nothing.
That's deep in itself, though.
Ray Rice knocks his fiance out on video, and they give him probation. I think when you look at all these cases, I know, because I know the average person out there thinks like lawyers are equal. It's like the difference between getting Michael Jordan as your lawyer or getting like, a guy who can't even make a JV team.
Not at all.
So I think it makes a substantial difference, and I've seen it. But to me, what I kind of spend a lot of time on is looking at these individual cases. And I think people say like, oh, Clay Travis doesn't believe Michael Bennett. You said you hadn't paid a lot of attention to it, but I think that he exaggerated and made up. And the 3 cops there, 2 of them were Hispanic, 1 of them was black in Las Vegas. They're responding to an allegation of a casino shooting. He behaved, I think, in a suspicious fashion. They had him on video. They pulled him aside. All those things. Like the story of him alleging racism is the lead story on like every sportscast.
Right.
So
do you feel? I mean,
when that's not true.
Right.
Like I think people wanted it to be true because they believe their worldview supports that. And I think in the world of sports right now, we owe it to people to try to get the actual facts of a case before. The same thing with Ezekiel Elliott. Come back to Ezekiel Elliott. I think he got suspended because the NFL wanted to be like, beating women is bad. I don't think there are very many people out there who are like, you know what? I think that women should get beat up by men. Like I just don't buy into that there's anybody out there who actually believes it, right? But I think that they're so afraid of being called soft on that Ezekiel Elliott got hit with a penalty that wasn't justified based on the facts of his case.
I would agree with that too.
Yeah.
I mean, would you agree that when you look at, because I know you're not a fan of, you weren't a fan, or still aren't a fan of the NFL protests.
I'm not at all. Well, let me say that. The other thing I did, I went on CNN, you didn't mention it, but I said I believe only 2 things completely. It
was coming.
First Amendment and boobs, right? Which I think is a funny line because, and I've been using it for a while, because the First Amendment is such like a, it's hard to kind of get your hands around, right? But everybody understands boobs. So I thought the juxtaposition of those 2 phrases was kind of funny and also kind of like crystallized.
I'm gonna let you finish your point, but you have to acknowledge that that would get backlash.
I didn't. I said it on the show the day before.
Come on, Clay.
I said it the day before.
But it was on your show, right?
No. I said it on Headline News the day before to another female anchor.
Really?
And she laughed. I think in that situation, Brooke Baldwin, the woman who was in charge of CNN, of the show, completely overreacted to it. In all honesty, I was not. I've said it for a long time on my radio show. I've written it. I said it in Headline News the day before. I honestly did not think that it was going to cause her to stop the interview.
You say you have 2 sons?
3.
3 sons. So say a guy comes up to your wife and says, "I love your boobs."
That's different.
How's that different, Clay?
Because I said I like boobs. I didn't say. First of all, I can't even see her. But if I had said like I like your boobs in particular,
right,
then that's me talking about her physical appearance.
So if a guy comes up to your wife and says, "I like boobs,"
be totally fine with it.
Come on, Clay.
Seriously.
But you don't see how it can be skewed or viewed as disrespectful?
No, I really don't.
Come on,
because
man.
I would say because
and this is what I think.
No, I mean this honestly. I don't think
this is where I think the character in you comes out.
No, I don't think there's a single woman out there. I think she, like, if you compare the way we reacted, all right, I think that she was totally overreacting and doing that for show, right? She was like, "Oh my God."
Possibly.
Totally trying to get
100% possibly.
Yes. And whereas I'm being authentic to it. I don't think there's a single woman out there who's listening to us right now or on earth that's surprised that men like boobs.
100%. But there's a difference between authentic and being a genuine, caring person, right? So if I don't know another human being and I'm not 100% comfortable or understand their comfortability with my lexicon, I'm not gonna use I haven't said nigga on this podcast once yet, right? I say nigga every day of my life, like, but because that's not really this kind of party.
That gets into the whole debate about like how we've dumbed down racism. To me, is we've dumbed down racism to if a white guy says a word like that, then he's racist. And like I'm an actions over words guy.
I'm not. That's not what I'm saying. That wasn't the point of that.
But that kind of goes into my larger context of I think so much of what people focus on today is bullshit, right? I mean, straight up, like people focus on like distracting, like.
But you're part of it, though.
Part of it, but if people who actually,
I'm talking about you're part of the driving force.
But if people, I see that's where I would dispute. If people actually come in and listen to my show, or if they read my columns, or if they pay more attention than just like the headline, I can't tell you the number of times people say like, "I wanted to hate you." And I started listening to your radio show.
I did too. I mean, I'll be honest. I have it written down right here. I said it's a mixed bag, and like I don't totally disagree with everything you say because I'm more of a middle
Well, I think that's what, and so people say, like, I don't know if that's my fault for the media picking up on certain, like, the media makes everybody a caricature, right?
Yeah, I would agree.
And on some level.
But you play to it.
But, well, first of all, that's partly because I don't care what people say about me. Secondly, the number one way that people find out about me is oftentimes because people will say, can you believe that asshole Clay Travis and what he said? And people will come read it. You know what happens? Like, in the social media era, let's say that 10 people share this podcast.
Right.
Okay.
Hopefully it's more than that.
Oh, but yeah, but like just 10. Let's say 10. 5 of them might be like, I listen to that guy Clay Travis with Arian Foster. He's the biggest motherfucker. I can't stand him. Go listen to it. And they share it with all their friends, and they think that everybody's going to agree with them.
Right.
And then other people are listening. Like, man, now that I actually listen to that guy, I actually agree with a lot of what he says. Right. And then you bring in. So it's almost like. What I would say is the media wants to caricature everybody, whether you are Barack Obama or Donald Trump or Brad Pitt or Denzel Washington or whoever you are, right? The media wants to build this huge, high, like sky high impersonation of you, and it's like 6 inches deep.
Right.
And then some people are like, oh, that's intriguing. I want to go find out more about that guy. Like once, like the CNN thing, like once it blew up, I was like, "Fuck! This is the best advertisement I ever had. I'm going to take advantage of it."
I know you know that's. I know you know that though, man.
Yeah, but so when people decide they're going to caricature me, what they were trying to do was say, "Oh, Clay Travis should never be able to talk again," right? But what I do is I don't tiptoe up to anything, and I'm like, "This is an opportunity for people who may not know me to come read me, listen to me, like." And a lot of those people end up hanging around because they're like, "I kind of like this guy. Like, I like what he says," and even if I don't agree with him. What they realize is there is a basis behind, like, you ask me any opinion, like, I can defend any opinion that I got. Right.
There's honor amongst thieves.
Right. Whereas I think there's a lot of dudes out there in our industry who say things and then you ask them to defend it and they can't do it because there's no basis to it.
That's majority of America, though. I
think there's a lot of truth to that, too.
But see, I feel like this is where it gets dangerous, right? This is where it gets dangerous. You can defend it. Like I said, when we set this up, we're not totally, and the more I research and the more I talk to you, we're not totally opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Ideologically, as I thought we were, but when you have certain hot button issue opinions, you can be as genuine to yourself as possible. But is it responsible to present that information in a way that can be skewed as any other way than thoughtful? Because if the point is everybody feels and says they're a peaceful human being, right? I could sit up here and I could say fuck you, this, that, and throw stats in your face and say Black Lives Matter, all of that. Yeah. But it's not. There's no progress in that. The progress is I want to understand where you're coming from. Yeah. I want to get to know where you're coming from, and I want you to understand where I'm coming from, and that's where progression happens. So we could leave this table and say, you know what, that's not that bad of a cat. Yeah. You know, if you're coming into this situation, let me check this Clay Travis cat out, right? So if that is the goal, there is no point in manifesting a caricature of yourself.
See, and I don't think I do that. I mean, I think that most of the time.
So do you think do you think that you come in every situation as honest, humble, and
not humble,
respectful? That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Like growth because in this climate, and I feel like that's why you're succeeding right now in this market, is because we live in that climate where there are guys out there saying Lenny Dunham is a bitch, Jamil Hill is stupid, and they feel that, but they feel that on no other basis than whatever their reasons may be, and a lot of their reasons carry racist undertones. So when you,
by the way, I like Jamel. I tried to get Jamel to come on. I know she's upset with me now.
Well, it's because of how you. Let me finish it and I'll say. So when you become the flag carrier, the torch bearer of their beliefs, and they don't even know why they believe what they believe, that's why you become an alt-right media darling. That's why you become the face of whatever people are accusing you of. So I understand like you might like Jamil Hill, but when you sitting here saying Jamil Hill is stupid, Lena Dunham is a bitch, DeMarcus Cousins getting arrested, whatever the case may be, there is a certain level of respect that you have to grant somebody.
I've been meaner to former Tennessee football coaches than I have to any of the people that you just named there.
But no. I feel you. But like, if you were to like say one of my, like, I have thick skin, right? A lot of people like
I have. That's the other thing. I have insanely thick skins. People say, well, you apply the golden rule. I do. Like I also don't hold grudges. So if you name like those people and they had come after me, I would go on their show the next day. Right. Like you could come on your podcast and have said, Clay Travis, the biggest motherfucking loser. I can't stand him. I'd still come on your podcast, right? Like because I like you, I like your family from when we wrote the book, but also because like what people say about me legitimately doesn't last. I always say like I have the memory of an NFL defensive back, right? I might get burned for a touchdown on one play, but the next play I'm lining up across from you expecting that I'm going to win.
And I feel that, but I don't think the danger is in your self-worth, right? I think the danger is adding fuel to the fire of an already hot climate.
But see what I think I'm doing, and I understand that. I think that people who are caricaturing me are using headlines, like, oh, Clay Travis went on CNN and said he loves the First Amendment and boobs. And
but come on, man.
But see, to me that's funny. Like, right? Like
yeah, it's funny. But and so, you heard the old saying, it's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Yeah.
So if your point was, listen, you can I am an absolutist, a First Amendment absolutist, and I believe that you should be able to say and feel that is the cornerstone of a democracy.
Yes.
I agree. Or
it's the most important right that we have.
Yes. Then say it like that. You're not going to get as many clicks, and that's why I believe that's your angle.
Well, I mean, I don't know about the angle. I mean, again, I've said that a lot, and if I had known that was going to be the one that got all the attention,
you just said it earlier.
I said it on headline news the day before.
Right.
And so it wasn't like I just really didn't think that was going to get a lot of attention.
Right.
And so to me, again, I would say that the media often, and you probably know this from when you were playing, the media decides what they want you to be based on what that media entity believes.
I would agree.
Right. And so people have decided that I represent either the best thing or the worst thing in sports media today. And then they have that working thesis and they decide to advance it. And you can pull, a bunch of different headlines of things that I have said over the years and say like, oh my God, Clay Travis, how did you say that? But then if you actually dive into what I said, which is what I would say most of my audience, people who like me, I would say, are spending a lot of time with me, right? They're listening to me for 3 hours in the morning. Mm-hmm. They're listening to my afternoon podcast. They're reading the columns on Outkick. And whatever the headline is, they get the headline. I'm big on context. Like we were talking earlier about Jamel. Like I like Jamel. I think she's really talented. And I have said before with her, like I'd love to do a radio show with her because we obviously have different perspectives on a lot of different things.
Right.
But she's funny and she's smart. And I've always said one of my flaws.
But you also said she's stupid.
I said some of her opinions are stupid.
No, you said she was stupid.
No, I didn't say she individually was stupid.
All right, I'm a double back, and if I'm wrong, I will rescind.
I said some of her opinions are stupid, and if she is making some of the arguments, but I don't think there's anything wrong with. She would also be able to say, I think Clay Travis's opinion there is stupid, right? Like I don't think there's anything wrong with somebody saying that, right? Like
I agree,
and so,
but I feel like it's that relationship though, and so. Go ahead.
No. But so what I was going to say about that was when I pulled your podcast and put it up on Outkick, I made sure that I put the whole context, right?
Right. You did.
So I think the media very often, and this has been an issue that I've had across the board for years, wants to take one sentence and you read that one sentence and you're like, oh, and then you watch the whole thing in context and you're like, oh, I totally understand where he or she was coming from there.
Right.
And so I don't have a problem with people disagreeing with what I'm saying or with my perspectives, but I would just ask them to look at a larger context than just a headline and actually make your own opinions as opposed to letting people just tell you, define you.
Well, that's what I could appreciate in doing research on you before you having you come here it's the sentiment I got, right? So I wanted to hate you. I did. I'll be honest. I wanted to hate you.
There's probably people listening to the show right now who might still hate me.
100%. Yeah. But I think it's always so. I follow. What I used to. I follow like Ben Shapiro on Twitter.
Smart dude.
Right? Yeah, super smart guy. I don't agree with a lot of what he says,
right,
man, but I can appreciate how he got there. Right.
And there's a logic behind it.
There's a logic behind it, and you follow certain steps, and it's just not fluff. Like you have substance behind what you say. So that I can appreciate. I don't agree with a lot of what you say, but I do agree with some of what you say. So I feel like that is my goal. My podcast is basically me exploring myself through other people.
Yeah.
We have good conversations. I test my ideas. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'll go back and I'll change the way I think. But I feel like I stated earlier, for progression to happen in a society, I think people like you, I think people like me, I think people like a Donald Trump, people who have people's ears have a certain responsibility for some, and I understand you have to pay your bills, but I feel like you have to have some kind of responsibility for diplomacy.
Yeah, and I guess the way that I think is I believe in, like, more than anything else in my life, other than boobs, a robust...
What does that even mean, bro? What do you mean believe in boobs?
Boobs have never let me down. I just love them. I like women. I like boobs. I like the legs too. I don't want to offend the ass men out there.
So like you and your wife, y'all be looking at boobs together?
I like to look at her boobs. I mean,
yeah, I hear you.
But so and they're real and spectacular, as they'd say on Seinfeld. But so like I like uninhibited, robust marketplace of ideas, and so to the extent that like. I don't soft pedal my ideas, right? And I think sometimes people will only grab the headline, right? But to me, in this era where it's so hard and there's so many voices going at all points, to me, sometimes you have to have a really strong thesis statement to get people's attention. And then to the extent that people only look at the thesis statement and don't actually like dive underneath, I agree with you. But to me, there's a foundation behind everything that I say. And so what I'm trying to do is get people to come in through the thesis statement, like, holy shit, Clay Travis said X, and then they click, and if they get the context, they're like, I can totally see that. Now, the problem we're in is that a lot of times now, people decide they have to have a total opinion just based on, like, I'm a read the articles guy, right? Mm-hmm. I'm a read the full quotes. Like, back when I would write regularly about what quotes people would give in press conferences and stuff, I want to go read the entire transcript. Like when Nick Saban talks to the media, I want to go look at everything he said. I don't want somebody else to just tell me a sentence. I want to see what the context of it is. And so I can't control the fact that a lot of people are lazy and won't actually go unpack a headline. But to me, there's a method, for lack of a better, there's a method to the madness of what I'm doing, to the extent that I know like that thesis statement has to be good in order to get people in. It's like the first line in a novel is the most important line, right?
I would agree.
If you read it, you like it, you're going to read the next one. To me, sometimes that has to cut through the noise.
That's the shock value.
Yeah, and
I agree.
Or I would say pop.
So the only thing I have against that is, so it's basically a slogan, like you said, a thesis, a slogan, something to catch people's attention. But this is where I feel like it hinders society rather than helps.
Is it my fault if people don't follow up the thesis? If they just on the surface level want to talk about the sentence, that gets a lot of attention and it brings people in. It's like
if you were acting like you're saying now, no. But I don't think there's a Disneyfication of your
it's a good line. But no, I think if you listen to my radio show, and I think if people are listening to this podcast and also listen to the radio show,
right,
they'd be like, that's the guy I listen to for 3 hours every morning.
Right.
And I think they would say that's the guy whose columns I read 4 times a week. I think the people who are listening to me right now and like, I kind of like that guy, or that guy doesn't sound so bad, I think those are the people who have allowed other people to surface level define.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. So it's like, okay, so when Donald Trump says "Make America Great Again," right? I think that's one of the most asinine statements that has ever been marketed.
We're going to elect an emoticon president in
soon. I would agree. I would agree. Definitely.
We're not exactly having the Lincoln Douglas debates these days.
I feel you, absolutely. So when you have a slogan like "Make America Great Again," right, that has shock value, yeah, I want to do that. But then you look into the substance of it, like what era should we go back to?
Well,
and there is no era that anybody can point to me that's better than the era that we were already in, right?
Look, I'm an optimist. I think America has always been great. Every year America has gotten better than it was the year before, pretty much.
I would agree, but America has not always been great for colored people, Clay.
But every day America has gotten. What I'm saying is, if you go back to 1783 when America gained independence, I think just about every month and every year since 1783, America has gotten better.
I would disagree with that.
When do you think the best time in the history of the country is?
Today.
I agree. But so like, when have we gone?
I'm saying the progression I don't think was as it got better month for month. I think it got shitty as hell, and then people bled for it. So I don't think it's as sexy as you making it.
I don't know if it's sexy, but I think like basically the progression of America is a good one, right? Like the trajectory is good. So I thought that America was good with Barack Obama as president. I thought that America was good with, like every year of my life, I'll say. I'm 38. Right. I was born in 1979. I think every year that I have lived, America has gotten better than the year it was before.
And I would agree. I would agree with that. The issue that I have, and I don't want to spend too much time, but the issue that I have is that we do live in a clickbait society, right? So people do just look at the titles, and since you know that. And like I said, it's part of your shtick. That's how you get an audience, right? I understand that. But I still feel like it's kind of disingenuous because you're pandering to it and you know people don't. And like I said, it might not be your fault, but it's indirectly your fault because
I think that it's just like you're blaming the player for the game or whatever. Like
don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yeah, I mean, like the way that the media exists today, because I'm able to play it like a fiddle in order to advance what I think are important causes. You know, I think to the extent that I have gifts in this arena of what I make a living doing, I think I'm incredibly good at understanding how stories are going to play and what big stories are going to be.
I would agree with that.
I think what I do, if you actually come and spend time on the radio show or if you spend time reading the columns, I think you'll see a degree of intellectual depth that is there. Whether you agree or disagree with my conclusions, like you were talking about Ben Shapiro, there's steps where I take to get to a logical conclusion, right? And so I think people are oftentimes, if they decide they don't like me, they're like, oh, did you see did you see that headline or did you see that 10 seconds, that clip? And so I don't really worry about that because that to me is like an advertisement, right? Some people are going to hate you no matter what. Mm-hmm. You know, we live in a 50-50 society, basically. Mm-hmm. And if people want to hate me, that's fine. Because sometimes people who hate me are people who come and read everything that I write, right? I mean, it's crazy. As they say about Howard Stern, like the people who loved him listened for like X number of time, and the people who hated him listened for like 3 times that amount of time, right? So I don't worry too much about that, but I think I'm good at cutting through the clutter. And so if there's other people out there who like are, I don't think in the world of sports media, I don't think there are very many people who produce as much content, smart content on a consistent basis as I do. So I'm my toughest critic. You know, I read what I write. I go back and I challenge myself. There's never been a column that I've deleted in, like 10 years of writing online. There's never been, there's never been anything where I thought that I had totally crossed the line, right? Mm-hmm. And so I understand like that argument, but I would say that to me, if you're going to have an opinion of a guy or a girl or a case or a situation, what I do is go read everything that I can about it and then come up with an opinion. I think that's rare.
Yeah, no, 100% is rare, and that's why I think you're asking an illogical society to be logical.
Well, that's a big part of the challenge, I think.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we live in an emotion-based society, and a lot of times I say, just look at the facts here. Right. People want to say, oh, well, women are getting beat up all the time. Okay. That doesn't mean that Ezekiel Elliott beat up this woman in this particular circumstance. Racism exists. Right. That doesn't mean those cops were racist against Michael Bennett.
So real quick, and we'll wrap this up because it's been a great conversation, man. But just I want to get your opinion on this. So when you say let's look at the facts, it's about the facts. So what happens when people disagree on facts, right? So
that's a challenge, and that's scary.
What I'm saying.
I think.
I saw a clip where you said the Civil War wasn't about slavery, and I couldn't be on the other side anymore without falling off.
Exclusively about slavery.
So that was a clickbait because you specifically said it was not about. Okay.
So to me, like when you dive into, so I'm a huge history buff.
Yeah.
To me, when you dive into the Civil War, what I said was I hate the Disneyfication, like in a larger context. One of the things that bothers me about history in American society today is when we apply our modern morals for historical figures. Okay, so it's great if somebody had.
Hold on, stay there for a second.
Yeah.
Why do you hate that?
Because I think that everybody is a product of the era in which they're born and raised.
I think that's a good argument if... Okay,
so let me circle back around on the Civil War to explain that.
Okay.
in the Civil War times, almost exclusively, you fought for the state in which you lived. Okay? Like there were Tennesseans who fought for the North, and there were Kentuckians who fought for the South, and there were, border states, like people would change their minds. But like 95% at least to 98% of Civil War soldiers fought for their home state, because at that point in time, your state was like your country. Most of those guys wouldn't travel outside of their state more than a time or two, if that, in their entire lives, because it was so difficult. So the idea that your average guy in bumfuck Mississippi was fighting the Civil War over slavery is, I think, untrue, because only like 7%, I think 5% of Southern soldiers actually owned slaves. He was fighting.
I think that's erroneous.
He was fighting because he got conscripted, because his state went to war, and like everybody else out there, rich man's war, poor man's fight, he had to show up and go fight, or else he went to jail.
I think he had incentive, though, not to be the bottom of the hierarchy in civil society.
And I understand that argument, but I don't think that your average soldier, based on everything that I have read, was making a decision to fight a war over slavery. I think he was fighting because the North invaded his state, right? One day you're living in Nashville, Tennessee. Next thing you know, there is an army there coming into your community.
Right. And see, that's where we'll probably bump head, because historians argue about this, right? So
totally. I mean, there's a lot. Look, and the other thing is, I think that we've created, because I love the Civil War. Like, I've read so much about the Civil War. I think it's the most fascinating time in our country's history, other than the Civil Rights Movement. Those, to me, the twin most important times.
Okay, go ahead.
And I'll explain that if you want me to. So the Civil War, to me, what I'm afraid of is, and you mentioned the phrase that I like to use too, we've Disneyfied everything. And so what we've done is we've created this idea of, the Southerners who fought in the Civil War were these racist, awful Neanderthal human beings.
Well, they
in
were.
the North. That's not true. And the North,
it's not true.
No. And the North were these gallant, like liberal, like going to say most.
And I would say that's not true.
Yeah, most Northern soldiers. I mean, if you go study history, when Abraham Lincoln did the Emancipation Proclamation, first of all, he only freed the slaves in the southern states of rebellion. So he didn't free the slaves in the border states where slavery was still allowed. Secondly, there were mass riots all over the North over people who were like, we're not going to go to war to fight to try to end slavery. Like, we just don't believe that the South should be able to secede. And so there were all sorts of people who fought in the South that didn't necessarily agree with slavery. In fact, there were Southern generals who argued that we should free the slaves and allow them to fight for the South. And in fact, at the time of the end of the war, the Southern Confederacy had offered freedom to all slaves who fought for the South. And they were actually having soldiers who were training to fight for the South. Now, was slavery a huge part of the war? No doubt. Do I think one of the tragedies of the Civil War was that we had to go to war to end slavery? Yes. I wish we could have ended slavery in a peaceful fashion and not had to kill hundreds of thousands of people to do it.
It would have been great.
But that was and so the reason why I say that those are the Civil War and civil rights are so fascinating to me is they represent this inherent tension that has existed in America since the country was founded between what exactly are the parameters of power. Is the federal government going to be strong and kind of control everything? Or are the state governments going to be strong and be able to govern their own citizens? And that's a tension that's existed ever since our country was founded and still exists today with pot laws. I saw the other day where, or just this last week, where the Attorney General says that maybe he's going to start enforcing federal pot laws.
Which is ridiculous.
I agree. Because I mean...
But this is why I say where it's back to being like dangerous, right? So when you say... And
I'm not a tear down... Let me also say this. I'm not a tear down statues guy. I'm not a, like all those things. Like, I understand that some people who are, like wanting Confederate statues to stay up are avowedly racist, right? And I don't support those people.
Well, this is what I'm saying. So when you say, because from the video I saw, and maybe it's YouTube, it was labeled differently than what you're saying. You're saying it wasn't just about slavery, which I would agree, but it was pretty much all about slavery. It was about the state's rights to keep slaves.
Well, and also the state's rights to secede, which nobody talks about. Like, at the time that
but they wanted to secede because of the labor that they had.
Partly, yes, but I mean they believed they had the right to secede, and so my issue is but
it's really relevant to the point, and like I said, we can go back and forth, but the point of that whole bringing that up is when you make a video about that, and I understand from your vantage point, you're trying to educate people on the Civil War because you're passionate about that.
Yeah.
A lot of the people who want Confederate statues to stay up, who fly the rebel flag, feel the same way about the Civil War.
Yeah,
and they try to Disneyfy about slavery wasn't as bad as we're getting taught in schools. So they have a lot of the same ideologies that you're flying in the face. So when they say that you're the face of the alt-right or whatever they call you, that's what I'm saying when you have to be cognizant of the content that you put out there.
But see, I'm the guy who would drive to a Civil War conference listening back in high school and college, or high school, I guess it was, to Bone Thugs and Harmony, right? I have
a black friend argument.
No. I grew up in a city like Nashville where, I can simultaneously be fascinated by the Civil War culture and the history there, and also be fascinated by the Civil Rights Movement and not see those necessarily as contradictory opinions, right? So I think, to the extent that people out there saying, "Oh, I want Confederate flags to be up or Confederate monuments to be up because of racism," that's stupid. I mean, I completely disavow that, right? But I think the line that I find intriguing is, when is it permissible to tear down monuments based on present day historical opinions? George Washington was a slaveholder.
100%.
And if he had lived...
And raped slaves.
If he had lived in the Civil War era, he would have fought for Virginia and fought for the South. Mm-hmm. So Abraham Lincoln's wife owned slaves, and...
Abraham Lincoln was a white supremacist.
He wanted to send all the slaves back to Africa.
Right.
Thomas Jefferson was and by the way, everybody who was just about in the 1860s was a white supremacist, right? Regardless of what side they were fighting on.
Yeah, but that doesn't minimize that ideology and why that ideology is still rampant in our society today.
But what I'm saying is we've created this artificial dichotomy of good and bad when the reality is everybody was a product of their time. Same thing with Thomas Jefferson, who clearly, it appears, slept with one of his slaves and had kids, right?
Easily.
Based on DNA.
Yeah.
So, where do you draw the line? Should you tear down all of those monuments?
So it depends on how.
And by the way,
it depends on how. Go ahead.
It doesn't stop there. MLK. If you go back and I went to a school named after MLK, which is its own kind of interesting angle in the evolution of a southern city, right? That I would go to a school in Nashville
where the black folk live.
That was majority, 55% white, whatever it was, named after Martin Luther King, right? That wouldn't have happened if I had been born in 1945, right? I mean, so I'm living in a little bit of a different era. But to me, one of the things that's fascinating about that is, where do you draw the line? So
to me, it depends on how intellectually honest you want to be, right? So a lot of the people, and I'm not saying necessarily...
Sorry, let me say about MLK. There are videos, audio tapes, because the FBI was recording Martin Luther King like crazy, right?
Definitely.
So because they thought he was a communist and they were worried about his overall influence, and that's part of the Parting the Waters, the trilogy that Taylor Branch wrote, that I would encourage everybody to read. But it was fascinating about Martin Luther King. He's on tape in having sex with prostitutes, screaming that he's fucking for Jesus. Mm-hmm. Okay? That to me doesn't take away from his ability to be a great leader. And I remember having that conversation with Taylor Branch, and he's like, some people are very unhappy with me for putting that stuff in the books. And I said, why are they unhappy? And he said, because, historical figures become not
idols.
Human.
Yeah, they become idols,
they're not like you and me. And so, but he said, what I tell everybody who's a critic out there is, I say, if Martin Luther King could accomplish all that he did while he was having sex with prostitutes and screaming about how he's fucking for Jesus and everything else, imagine what you, with no flaws whatsoever in your own private life, should be able to accomplish. And that causes people to pause, right? Because they're like, well, I'm flawed just like he is. But so where do you draw the line?
That's what I say. So, I mean, if the fucking for Jesus thing doesn't really, because when people say Jesus to me, it's not like,
but for a minister who's considered to be on tape, they literally have his voice.
I understand. So I think there's it's like I said, it depends on how intellectually honest you want to be, right? So if you're going to say, because the majority of people that want to keep Confederate, I would say the majority, and this is the blanket statement, but correct me if I'm off in this. But the
I don't know. That's
right.
That's an answer to answer your question.
So in my opinion, and I'll happily rescind if this is wrong, but the majority of people that want to keep Confederate status up would consider themselves Christian.
I think that's certainly true. The majority of people who are American and
so
consider themselves Christian.
And this is my problem with theology in general is if you have a God that is omniscient and omnipotent, then morality should transcend error. Right? So if we're judging people by this supreme moral code, then we're judging people by the supreme moral code, and let's not cherry pick what's.
Except that all of the religions back then said slavery was allowed under the Bible.
I agree 100%, which is why I think the whole book is bullshit. But that's a whole nother conversation. But what I'm saying is, if you want to be intellectually honest, let's hold these people accountable for the criminal acts that they committed. And granted, the land, and even the Bible says you have to obey the land. Slaves have to obey the land of the law.
Yeah.
And whatever the land of the law is, that's the land of the law. But I think that's where you draw the line. How intellectually honest do you want to be?
Well, I think also how far back do you want to go? Because do you tear down the pyramids? They're built with slave labor. And then that's where it gets scary to me, because I mean that's like how far down the line do you go? Because like ISIS, ISIS is over, and all these Islamic fundamentalists are like, oh, we want to tear down these great moments, these great things from art because they don't represent, Muhammad, right? Mm-hmm. And so
I'm not a Muslim apologist. Though,
yeah, so. No, I and look, I don't really care about your religion or anybody else's religion. It doesn't really impact me on a day-to-day basis in any way. So whatever. But I do think that's where when I talked earlier about how I see like the spectrum as coming to a more of a circle than it is like left and right. That's where sometimes people who are far left, like what I would say, like trying to erase wrongdoing in our society, that's where they start to have similarities with people on the far right, who are saying like, oh, we've got to tear down this because it desecrates Muhammad or whatever.
Right, and I think when you're dealing with something like that, it's a case-by-case scenario, right? So, like, if people feel uncomfortable with George Washington statues, I don't have a problem with it because, like, they say it's not going to erase the history of what happened. He's still going to be in the textbooks.
I also think this also goes to motivation. We're talking about the motivation of the people who want to leave the statue up.
Right.
I don't get the sense that the people who want to tear down the statues really care about tearing down the statues. I think they care about tearing down the statues because they want to upset the people who want the statues to still be there.
That could be part of it, but it's like everything, like no blanket statements, everything is a spectrum. So there could be people who really feel strongly about it. And
yeah, and look,
it is weird. Like, so as a black man, it is weird. Like it's weird that we have a Columbus Day. I'm pretty sure natives in this country, it's weird. That's weird as hell.
Well, I mean, the people who have been the most screwed in the history of the country are Native Americans.
Yeah, 100%. And they don't have a lot of say in what's going on. Putting reservations. I grew up on a reservation, right by a reservation.
They got murdered.
Yeah, and so I think
ethnically cleansed, basically.
Yeah, it's.
I mean, that's why the Germans. That's why it's kind of fascinating. That's why the Germans, during their Holocaust and while they were like doing everything in World War II, Hitler made the argument, we're just doing the same thing to people here that Americans did to Indians back in the day.
And that's what I think. That's why it's an interesting time in this country for me, because I think there has to come a day of reckoning where the right says move on, it's over, and some of the left is saying no, you still have not. Face the transgressions that you have been accused of and that you've done.
But so I think the problem in general is that both of these parties have gotten so good at dissecting people down to their most like base core that this is where I came back again. So I asked like what I consider myself a radical moderate. Like I think that they are so pigeonholing people that they have overlooked like the middle part of the country. Does that make sense? Like they're so good at motivating their bases that they're not recognizing how many people they're alienating in the process. And I think, frankly, there are a lot of people out there who are like fiscally conservative that don't feel like the Republican Party represents them when it comes to aggressive social issues.
Well, me and my mother was talking about this earlier. I think it's time for
your mom, by the way, awesome. I'm not just saying that to try to
get brownie points. Hey, heard that, Mom?
She is great.
Clay fucks with you, Mom. But I think it's time for another political party.
I agree,
because we're so far apart now.
Well, and there's so many people who would have like it used to be. I just think there's so many people in the middle part of the country who don't feel like they're being spoken to, and that it's unfortunate. Like in 2016, in the history of the country, we nominated the two most hated people for the Democrats and the Republicans.
That's what I'm saying. It was like a flip a coin.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think that's a coincidence because I think the reason why they're so hated is also why they're so loved, right? They both appeal to a small segment of the population.
Yes.
And as a result,
and an extreme population too.
And then they're going back and forth, and there's a lot of people who are like me, watching the debates, feeling like, God forbid, this is.
That's what I don't get about Trump apologists, and I don't want to spend any more time on Trump. But it's just like, how can you not look at that cat and say that's not he might be intelligible in his field, but like. He's not eloquent. He's not well spoken. Like he rambles.
Trump is not.
It's weird.
He's not a good advocate for himself.
Actually, he's the best advocate for himself.
I mean, but I mean, like a lot of his positions, I think people could be in favor of, like because you really break him down.
Yeah, his policies, like there's some.
He's one of the most liberal Republicans to ever get the nomination. Right. He's got a couple of crazy, like really right wing ideas.
Right.
But he was pro gay marriage, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, that's crazy. That's a crazy trajectory in and of itself. You can't tell me, and I've said this before, that Donald Trump has not paid for an abortion at some point in his life.
Oh yeah, I would bet money on that one.
This dude is not like the most pro-life candidate on the planet. I would put a lot of money on Trump having paid for an abortion at some point in his life. And so like, you just kind of look at. They obviously lived in New York City, which is a pretty diverse community. Uh-huh. Like, and people like Jamel said, Trump's a white supremacist. Mm-hmm. I think Trump is a Trump supremacist. I think he believes that he is better than everybody else in the world.
As far as the white supremacist claim about Trump is concerned, I don't have enough evidence to convict him of that crime. But I would say if anything comes out, it would not surprise me once in the least.
But see, I don't think that would be based on Trump being a white supremacist. I think Trump is like just so convinced of his own supremacy.
I would agree, but
and he surrounds himself with other people who
are
supreme.
I think his circle branches out, and I would put my money on, just like you would put your money on he's had an abortion. I would put my money on that he favors white folks more than he favors people. Didn't he settle some discrimination lawsuits?
Rich people. Like, I think he is attracted to rich people.
And that's what I say.
Why did he decide to meet with Kanye and Floyd Mayweather?
Because I think he's like you, and he knows what's going to get people reactionary.
There's no doubt that Trump is an incredible showman.
Yeah.
And so, like, he's going to be at the Georgia-Alabama game tomorrow. Like, he knows, I think he likes to put on a show.
Yeah.
I don't know how much depth there is behind his opinions.
Yeah, I don't. No, 100%.
I think he's like a comedian.
I don't think he wanted to win, honestly.
I don't know if he wanted to win or not, but I think he's like a comedian. The best example that I have is, how I like to go out to comedy clubs every now and then when I have some time, and you can watch somebody develop their act, and they have that right ear to be like, if I change this joke just a little bit, people are going to roll off their seats.
Right.
And I feel like Trump, when he goes out for his speeches, he's like a comedian trying out his material.
Right.
And when people respond in a really aggressive fashion, he's like, oh, this is good. This is like red meat. And whereas past politicians might have been like, oh, give me the poll data. Like, let me see what people actually think. Trump's thing is like, oh, I'm going to go out and I'm going to rip the NFL players for not standing up. Mm-hmm. And then when people go crazy at the rally, he's like, this is what my base wants. So he's intuitive in the same way that a comedian would be. The difference is, a comedian's just there to entertain. A comedian doesn't have to lead. A comedian doesn't have to do anything beyond like entertain us for an hour and a half. Right. Whereas Trump is an entertainer who basically got elected president.
Yeah, I would agree 100% with that. That's interesting, man. Like I said,
we could talk a long time.
Yeah, I didn't want to like you, man. But you are in my book. I don't agree with all the shit you say and how you say it, man. But I definitely respect how you get there, man. And I think more dialogue like this will be good for our people, man.
I agree. I think for everybody out there, if you spend some time, context is everything.
I agree, man. So I appreciate you sitting down with me.
Thanks for the invite.
No, for sure, man. Welcome on anytime. And I'm an advocate of getting you and Jamil together. I don't know if it's going to happen, man.
I like Jamel.
Stop calling people stupid, Clay.
I like Jamel. We've had a great...
It's all good. We leave the podcast the same every time, man.
Yeah.
Because one of my favorite human beings walking the earth is Jim Carrey.
Yep.
And so every person that comes on a podcast tries to convince Jim Carrey for me to come on. So we're gonna put the pressure on him, man. So if you could just look in this camera right here and try to convince Jim to come on, man.
Jim, is Jim a sports fan? Do you know that? Have you ever done
I don't know. I'll
tell you this.
If he was, I don't think he is now.
You've seen Liar Liar.
Yeah, of course.
So the kid in Liar Liar is the producer for my radio show.
I'm old.
He's like, he's in his 20s now. Yeah, the kid who played Justin Cooper, who plays the kid in Liar Liar, is the producer of my radio show out in L.A.
Do you ever give him the claw?
Oh, I mean, we have talked a lot about his childhood acting career, and that was the peak of his childhood acting career. But he's now like 25, 26 years old. The kid's fully grown up. So awesome. I will see if he has any entry to Jim Carrey still. He sees him every now and then.
That's awesome.
So yeah, that's for sure.
You gotta lobby for me, man.
Jim Carrey, if I were you, I would definitely come on this podcast. I don't know that you've ever done a podcast before, so it's time to end your podcast virginity.
There it is. Play. I appreciate you, Clay. And you can find Clay on
Twitter at Clay Travis. Just type in my name. Outkick.com is my website, and the radio show is 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern, 50 states. We're kind of everywhere with the radio show now, Monday to Friday.
Check him out, man. I appreciate you coming on, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir.